Topic of our Dhamma talk this evening is the hindrances, with a special emphasis on the hindrance of skeptical doubt. And what we shall do is cover quite a number of aspects that certainly concern the hindrances, and in particular the hindrance of skeptical doubt. If I think of my notes on the hindrances over the years, they've become thicker and thicker and thicker, and there's more and more to be added there. And certainly when preparing for this topic, then there was a realization, this aspect could be added, another aspect could be added. The hindrances are actually quite an interesting topic. Now, as a retreatant, especially during the first few days of a retreat, when attacked by this or that hindrance, or maybe even having to face a multiple hindrance attack, one might, or this might not feel, or it might not be all that pleasant. Sure enough, fair enough. But I hope that in the course of this talk, our relationship to the hindrances will change to some extent. Now, the hindrances do occur, regularly occur in our meditation practice, and they occur only during meditation practice. Would that be correct to say? Not at all. The hindrances can occur even during daily life, and I think it was Epstein, an American psychologist, who's written a small pamphlet on the hindrances and the married life. So even there, in that field, they tend to arise. Now, when a group of retreatants starts a retreat on the same day, and also ends the retreat on more or less on a scheduled day, then the arising of the hindrances becomes pretty obvious, because on day, for some day 2, for some on day 3, 4, 5, the hindrances will clearly be reported on. And so during the hindrance and during the interviews, this then cannot go unnoticed. One realizes, this retreatant is complaining about the hindrances, another one is complaining about the hindrances, and so on and so forth. Now, to understand the nature of the hindrances, we shall first take a look at mention some of the illustrations, some of the similes that have been given in this context in the text. Possibly the most significant simile is that of a traveler at a crossroads who cannot make up his or her mind which path to take. Should I follow this road or that road? And so what this means, or when applied to our meditation practice, a retreatant then might certainly be affected by or assaulted by questions such as, is this meditation method correct or not? Should I go along with this form of practice or maybe not? Now, the Anguttara Nikaya, in its 5th volume, section 193, compares certain of the hindrances to water that suddenly then occurs in different conditions. So the illustration given for the hindrance of greed is, or sense desire to be more accurate, is water mixed with manifold colors. The illustration given for the hindrance of ill will is that of boiling water. And then water which is covered by mosses is certainly given as an illustration for the hindrance of sloth and torpor, the third hindrance. Then the fourth hindrance is classically restlessness and remorse, and certainly the simile for this is water that is whipped up by the wind. There you go. So, water that is agitated and whipped up by the wind. Now, the last certain hindrance is certainly that of doubt. Skeptical doubt, to be more precise. And certainly, do you also remember the illustration that Buddha has given in this regard?
Dark water?
Dark water, yes, close. Turbid water. So, turbid, dark, muddy water. And certainly, if a person were to use a bowl full of water and then to see his or her reflection on the surface of that water. And in one case the water is mixed with various colors, in another case the water is boiling, in a third case it is covered by mosses, then agitated by wind, and the water in the last case being turbid and muddy. Then in all 5 cases it will be very difficult to see one's sudden reflection. Now, that same passage from the Anguttara Nikaya also ties in the attempt of a Brahmin to recite hymns that he has learned long time ago. So, what do you think? When trying to recite some verses, Pali verses, English verses, some poem, some song, the text of a song, and the mind is overwhelmed by the hindrance of sense desire, then will it be easy to remember those certain verses? Not so easy. And same thing goes when one is totally upset, angry, in a rage, just about to explode. One might not even want to recite certainly anything at all. So, this comparison with a Brahmin who is certainly trying to remember verses learned long time ago, and certainly then in the connection with the hindrances, is actually something that certainly one can experience for oneself when one has this habit of reciting text. When the mind is free of the hindrances, it will be easy to recite a text that has been learned long time ago. But when this or that hindrance is prevalent, is even quite predominant in the mind, then it will be a very difficult thing to do. Now, not only this, the Buddha states in connection with these various illustrations that a person who is overwhelmed by one or the other hindrance will not know his or her own good, nor will know the good of others, nor the good of both oneself and others. So one will not see what is in the end for one's own benefit or the benefit of others or both. Now, there is yet another illustration that has been given in the context of the hindrances, and in particular the hindrance of skeptical doubt, and this is once again that of a traveler who travels on a road infested by robbers and bandits, and then obviously is frightened. So a meditator then will be a meditator filled with doubt, will also be frightened. And when walking down that certain road, will always have second thoughts. Well, will a robber come and attack me? And when a person comes walking along that road from the opposite direction, then the question will arise in one's own mind: is this a decent person, or is this one of those famous robbers that others are talking about? So if finally our traveler has reached the destination and nothing has happened, then the fear will fall away, and suddenly the traveler will be quite happy and suddenly peaceful. So this illustration highlights an important aspect in connection with the hindrance of doubt, namely, doubt might easily arise in connection with fear. And there's certainly at least one passage in the text, and I'll mention it later on, that certainly describes just this. Now, by now, it should be pretty clear that a mind that is overwhelmed by a hindrance is not in a proper working condition. It will be impaired to some extent. It will not be able to function properly. And this particular aspect is nicely illustrated or by way of comparing the 5 hindrances with gold that is impaired, that is polluted by various other metals such as iron, copper, tin, lead, and silver. And silver being the example for doubt. So when a mind, or when gold is impaired by those various metals, then it certainly will not be pliant, wieldy, radiant, and firm, and it certainly cannot be wrought well. So it will be difficult to turn it into a piece of jewelry. Likewise, when the mind is afflicted by one or two or all of the hindrances, then such a mind will not certainly be pliant, wieldy, radiant, and firm, and cannot be worked with well. Now, with this, we know that there are 5 hindrances. The first one is the hindrance of sense desire, Kama Chanda Nivarana in the Pali scripture language. The second one is the hindrance of ill will, Vyapada Nivarana. The third one is the hindrance of sloth and torpor, Tinamida Nivarana. And then as number 4, we have the double hindrance of restlessness and remorse or worry. And the last one is skeptical doubt. Now, when it comes to the nature of these hindrances, they are frequently spoken about or spoken of as defilements of the mind which weaken the mind. So they do not strengthen your mind, but rather weaken them. Now, this isn't. There's several passages in the text that ascribe to this particular point here. Now, we can validate this aspect with our own meditation practice. Namely, when in our own meditation practice we have to deal with the hindrances again and again, what happens to our mind? When it gets tired, but over time, agitated, yes. But if we keep working with the hindrances and we achieve a state of absence of the hindrances, then it gets
steady.
Steady. What else? It becomes strong. So you can see the hindrances as challenges in your practice, and in the face of a challenge, you have to gather all of your mental strength in order to meet those hindrances and then to overcome them. If you don't gather your mental strength, well, you're bound to lose out. So if you keep dealing or tackling the hindrances time and again, the ultimate result is that the mind is going to get stronger. And so in the absence of the hindrances, or having overcome the set of hindrances, then the mind is likely to be fortified. Now, those or the set of 5 hindrances we are likely to experience not only in insight meditation practice or vipassana practice, but also in samatha meditation. And in the samatha meditation, so the meditation of calm, they tend to hinder the development of concentration, neighborhood concentration, as well as full concentration. And in terms of vipassana meditation, they tend to hinder the arising of liberating wisdom. So whether we like it or not, when engaging in Buddhist meditation, both forms of Buddhist meditation, we will have to face those hindrances. Now, not only have the hindrances been referred to as defilements which weaken the mind, but they have also been referred to as states that block or prevent or even overwhelm the arising of wholesome states of consciousness. They've further been referred to as blocking, stopping, preventing the wisdom eye from arising, as well as from the happiness of Nibbana from taking place. They've been referred to as obstacles, as well as fetters, and then as makers of blindness. Now, as briefly mentioned earlier on, they tend to hinder the proper functioning of the mind. So they interfere with how the mind is, or with the normal modus of operation of the mind. Now, the question has been asked already within the first few days of this retreat. Well, how do I recognize the hindrance of skeptical doubt? In an answer to this, allow me to quote the various synonyms given in the Dhamma Sangani for the mental state of doubt. Namely, doubt is, or this particular mental state can also be referred to as perplexity, as uncertainty, as being in two minds, as indecisiveness, as inability to make up one's mind, as an inability to come to a definite decision. And furthermore, as vacillation, as hesitation, as wavering, as mental stiffness caused by indecision, even vexation of the mind. Now, this doubt might even be referred to as distrust. Now, when we speak of doubt, we mean skeptical doubt, an ethically unwholesome doubt, and not methodical doubt or logical doubt about something. So it's not the doubt whether tomorrow it's going to rain or not, but rather the skeptical doubt from a spiritual point of view, having doubt in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the training, Dhamma, Sangha, and the training. Now, classically, doubt is defined as having the characteristic of doubting. Its function is to waver. So the mind goes here and there, and its manifestation is as indecisiveness and as taking various sides. And the proximate cause is certainly given as unwise attention, and doubt is said to be accompanied or to arise together with delusion, moha. And one antidote to doubt would be, and we will talk about this later on in the course of the talk, is the enlightenment factor of investigation of states. Now, the manifestation of doubt as indecisiveness, we can experience this in our own meditation practice in a very direct manner. Namely, let's say in the case of a new retreatant who's never meditated intensively before. So such a retreatant finds himself or herself in a retreat like our retreat. And sits there, sits quietly, follows the instructions, but the mind is overcome by questions such as, why are these people not talking? Why are they not looking at each other? This is weird. Have I really signed up for this? Maybe not. And maybe it's better if I go back home and do something else. Or it might be better if I leave this retreat and go and do some trekking here in the mountains. Let's say Lake Williams is not far from here. So those, and then maybe an hour later or a day later, when the practice, when this retreatant remembers to be mindful, and suddenly the practice then comes along nicely, and let's say some wholesome mental states arise, then the same retreatant might think, wow, this practice is really far out. I will stay. And no matter what. And so now then, in the course of just a day or two, you find how the mind goes from one extreme to the other. The extreme from considering to leave the retreat to the extreme of staying. And this is very common. So please do know that not every form of doubt is unwholesome. So there are being doubtful about dubitable things. The Buddha very much encourages this. He very much encourages inquiry, but it is the skeptical doubt that is considered to be unwholesome. Now, in the suttas itself, we find at least 2 or 3 discourses that do speak of doubt. In one discourse, namely the second discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, we have a description of a doubtful person who then unwisely attends to, which means brings unwise attention to questions such as, was I in the past? Was I not in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? And then, shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? And satna then, am I or am I not? What am I? How am I? And things like this. Or there is the Bea Berawa Sutta, namely the discourse on fear and dread. And satna, that discourse contains a passage that satna describes the Buddha before his gaining supreme enlightenment. So when he was still a bodhisattva, Buddha to be, and satna then over and then practicing in a forest, in a remote forest place, forest thick or dense forest thicket, and on occasion he would hear the sound of some animal coming by and making some noises, and then immediately a fear would arise. And the Buddha then trained himself to overcome this fear by facing the fear in whatever position or whatever posture it would occur. So he would face down the fear if it occurred in the standing posture or in the walking posture or in the sitting posture or lying posture. And then in that same sutta he continues to explain that Brahmins and contemplatives who would practice in a deep, in a dense forest thicket would experience Bea and Bhairava, namely fear and dread, owing to certain circumstances, namely owing to the arising of various mental states, unwholesome mental states. And such as sloth and torpor, such as certain desire, such as ill will, and also because of being uncertain, and doubting. So it is in the presence of, generally stating, of mental defilements that fear and dread can arise, and in particular because of skeptical doubt. Now, the Cetokila Sutta, again from the Majjhima Nikaya, volume 1, section 101, says here a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni or lay retreatant is doubtful, uncertain, undecided, and unconfident about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and the training. So there are several passages that do speak about satna, doubt. And satna, these passages highlight various satna aspects. Now, as a retreatant, how do we, or to add to what was satna mentioned earlier on, how could satna we experience satna, this satna doubt? Well, so questions about, should I stay or should I go? Should I continue to practice in this Mahasi tradition of Vipassana meditation, or should I maybe go and sit a retreat in a different tradition, maybe in the tradition of Goenka or some other well-known meditation teacher? Or the questions about satna, the teacher, questions about satna, the place, the fellow yogis, and satna, so on, might satna come up. Now, this is not certain, or these are not the only cases of how doubt might arise. If we think carefully about skeptical doubt as an occurrence in our meditation practice, then at times we might experience or have experienced the following. So we observe predominant objects, and then we realize that these predominant objects fall into two categories, namely being either of a physical nature or of a mental nature. This much we can acknowledge. But then the question comes, what is the cause for those physical and mental formations? And then the questions that might follow are, is there some supreme being here in control? Is there or is there not? What do you think? There's not. Well, if a supreme being is not in control, what about ourselves? Today's society is pretty individualistic, so then I must be in control. Is that the case? Jim, what do you think?
Don't pick on me.
So, that question then remains, who is in control? Am I in control? Am I the one who determines what happens in my meditation practice? Am I the one who determines how my rising and falling is going to be like or not? So, this certain particular form of doubt, of skeptical doubt, is bound to arise as part of our meditation practice, as part of the unfolding of the insight knowledges. It happens at a very particular place in our practice. And more on this later on. Now, as mentioned early on, skeptical doubt is an unwholesome mental state. It is based on delusion-rooted consciousness. It does arise together with the seven universal mental factors, namely contact, feeling, volition, and perception, volition, one-pointedness, life faculty, and attention. And it might also arise together with initial application of the mind, vitakka, as well as the sustained application of the mind, plus energy, and then the four unwholesome universals. Now, what might be some of the results of the arising and the presence of doubt in our own meditation practice? Now, to cite a passage from the Chetukila Sutta, namely the discourse on the wildernesses of the heart. And so it is a discourse that talks about various doubt in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and in the training, plus anger. Anger, aversion towards one's fellow companions in the spiritual mind. And that discourse then states a mind that is, or in which doubt has arisen, does not incline to ardor, devotion, perseverance, and striving. So if you're full of doubt, how can you apply yourself wholeheartedly to the job you're working on? So that's impossible. So the usual experience is when strong and long-lasting doubt is there, it really drains our energy, and in particular it drains our intention, our volition to apply ourselves. And so our energy, our effort will be clearly affected. Now, earlier on, one point was mentioned already, namely stiffness of the mind. When doubt certainly is prevalent, then the mind will be stiff and it cannot work properly. Can you think of other results of the presence of doubt in your own practice? Is that all?
Agitation.
Agitation? Yes, that's certainly, it's a good point. What else?
Hesitation. Hesitation?
Hesitation, yes, correct. And what about doubt and faith?
Self-doubt.
Self-doubt will be there. So, and certain faith then will be possible or not? Not. There you go. So, we can state that when much skeptical doubt is present in the mind, then faith or confidence or trust cannot arise in the stream of consciousness. Now, the mental factor of doubt is usually, as we've seen, now oftentimes manifests in the form of questions. Am I not? Should I stay? Should I not stay? Is this working or not? Am I having progress or not? Maybe not. And so doubt oftentimes goes along with a lot of thinking. And in the presence of much thinking, unrelated to what is actually going on in one's certain practice, it will be very difficult to observe the predominant objects. So just know this connection between the presence of the hindrance of skeptical doubt and the presence of, or the result of consequence in the form of much thinking, and the thinking then in turn will hinder the unfolding of our meditation practice. Now, from an experiential point of view, we could further say that doubts, when doubt is certainly present, then, when we do not apply ourselves wholeheartedly to the practice, and we don't observe carefully, etc., maybe also an unskillful attitude is there, then we are likely to have unclear experiences. So nothing is clear-cut. And those unclear experiences, if they keep occurring day after day, will then naturally lead to the arising of doubt. So, to better understand this, if you have a retreatant who applies himself or herself wholeheartedly to the practice and does this with a skillful, helpful attitude, such kind of a retreatant is likely to have unclear or clear experiences. Clear experiences. If you keep having clear experiences day after day, then what will arise? Doubt or faith? Faith. There you go. So you keep having clear-cut experiences, you realize, wow, this is really working. In my experiences are pretty much in line with what the Dhamma says. Naturally, faith arises. So unclear experiences have a tendency to lead on to the arising of doubt, and this then means that faith cannot arise. So just be aware of these kind of connections. Now, the Cetokila Sutta further states, and that's so it's the same discourse as mentioned as referred to earlier on. O retreatants, that any retreatant who has not abandoned the 5 wildernesses in the heart, namely doubt and Buddha Dhamma Sangha, in the training and anger, and not severed the 5 shackles in the heart, should come to growth, to increase and fulfillment in this Dhamma and discipline. That is impossible. Now, let's say, if we are greatly afflicted by doubt, then would running away from it be a proper solution? Would that be the way to go? It's not. So packing oneself things and running away, escape, is not the answer. The answer is, and maybe to elaborate on this, if we don't face the doubt during a retreat, we are likely to carry this doubt along with us back home, and we will have to face it there sooner or later. So, trying to overcome doubt by distracting oneself, let's say by indulging in food or what not, all of those things will not work. Doubt as a hindrance tends to arise at very specific places in our meditation practice, namely typically during the first insight knowledge, also, or possibly also during the second insight knowledge, more on this later on, then again during the third insight knowledge, then later on during the 10th insight knowledge. And there's also a place where the end of doubt takes place. Now, having explained this much on the hindrances in general and the hindrance of skeptical doubt in particular, the next thing then that needs to be explained is how to overcome skeptical doubt as a hindrance. How do we deal with it? And what would you recommend? Based on your own meditation practice. So running away, going home doesn't help. Attention. You mean mindfulness? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Anything else?
Turning around and facing it.
Turning around and facing it, yes, good. Still? More?
Perseverance.
perseverance, yes, that one is also good. Okay, now there are a few other points that could be mentioned. As we know, mindfulness is, or as the Buddha has stated, mindfulness is helpful everywhere, and this for sure does apply to the hindrance of skeptical doubt. So then we want to bring mindfulness to this hindrance. Now, in the context of the Satipatthana meditation practice that we're doing here, this then, or the relevant instructions, then can be found in the fourth establishment of mindfulness, namely Dhammanupassana Satipatthana. And I'm not going to go into this to a great extent, just mentioning a few details and just focusing on the hindrance of skeptical doubt. Dhammanupassana Satipatthana is mindful contemplation of Dhammas. So Dhammas are your phenomena or particular specific mental qualities or specific categories. One of those categories mentioned under Dhammanupassana is, or one of the specific mental qualities are your 5 hindrances, and among those the hindrance of skeptical doubt. Now, the Satipatthana instructions on the hindrances is fortunately more specific, more detailed than what we would usually say, just be mindful of the skeptical doubt. Now, it says, if skeptical doubt is present in oneself, know there is skeptical doubt in me. If skeptical doubt is not present in me, one knows there is no skeptical doubt in me. And so this is your presence-absence condition. And then thirdly, one knows how unarisen skeptical doubt can arise, how arisen skeptical doubt can be removed, and how a future arising of the removed skeptical doubt can be prevented. So basically, the Satipatthana Sutta, in its explanations on the fourth establishment of mindfulness, speaks of 5 conditions, 5 ways of dealing with the hindrances. The first one is the presence and absence condition, to know this. Then, first and second, and then if the hindrance of skeptical doubt is arising, to know the conditions that lead to the arising. If present, to know the conditions that lead to the removal, and if the hindrance of skeptical doubt has been temporarily removed, to know the condition that leads to the ultimate, to the final prevention or cessation of, or final cutting off of skeptical doubt. Now, just briefly on this presence and absence condition. Especially new retreatants who are not familiar with the hindrances may take a couple of days before they realize or recognize, oh, this hindrance or that hindrance has arisen in my stream of consciousness. before they realize skeptical doubt as skeptical doubt. And prior to this realization, skeptical doubt will be going on. All these many questions will come up in the mind. One will take this as the most normal condition in or of the mind, and will tolerate it, and will not recognize, oh, this is skeptical doubt. And as a result of this, one will not be mindful of it. But as soon as one realizes for oneself, or because of the prompting of a teacher, one realizes, oh, this is skeptical doubt, then one starts paying attention to it, and that then will help to then eventually overcome the skeptical doubt. Now, to be aware of the absence condition of skeptical doubt is equally important, because if one realizes skeptical doubt is absent, then certain consequences are likely to follow. For example, faith might arise, and this might be accompanied by gladness, joy, and tranquility, and so on and so forth. Now, the third instruction given with regard to skeptical doubt is, if skeptical doubt is arising, to know the conditions that lead to its arising. So if one frequently gives careless attention to the skeptical doubt and just tolerates it, accepts it, thinks it to be the most normal thing in the world, doesn't do anything about it, then this will strengthen a certain habit of the mind, a certain inclination of the mind, and you'll end up with more and more skeptical doubt. So this is in the text certainly referred to as the nourishment for the arising of doubt. The opposite to this is the denourishment of doubt, which happens when we do pay attention to it, and we do give wise attention to the presence of skeptical doubt, as well as seeing the difference between wholesome states, unwholesome states, and the like. Now, if skeptical doubt has been temporarily abandoned, then its ultimate, its complete cutting off will happen with the realization of the first noble path, namely the path of stream entry. So with this, it gets cut off once and forever. So mindfulness, and certainly in particular the fourth establishment of mindfulness, can be taken as one approach to deal with the hindrance of skeptical doubt, as well as with the other hindrances. Now, when we look at the texts, especially the Bojjhanga Samyutta, namely the collection of discourses on the enlightenment factors or awakening of factors as given in the Samyutta Nikaya, then we find several passages that describe a contrast between the hindrances and the enlightenment factors, certain hindrances and certain enlightenment factors. So, for instance, a contrast being made between the hindrance of sloth and torpor and the awakening factor of energy, virya, sambojjhanga. And then the hindrance of restlessness and remorse, and that being contrasted with the enlightenment factor of tranquility, passaddhi, sambojjhanga. Now, in the case of skeptical doubt, this gets contrasted with which mental factor, with which awakening factor? Faith. Is faith an enlightenment factor? It's not. Investigation. There you go. Investigation of states. Dhamma Vicaya Sambojjhanga in the Pali scriptural language. Now, skeptical doubt arises because of a lack of clarity about what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. There's a statement to this effect certainly in the Samyutta Nikaya as well as certainly in the Digha Nikaya. So not certainly clearly understanding. Now, from an experiential point of view, so from a meditator's point of view, when we start with our meditation practice and we observe physical and mental phenomena, and we become somewhat skilled in this, gradually which understanding will arise? Nama Rupa, this is correct. So discerning material phenomena from mental phenomena, and which other understanding will arise? So let's say anger comes up, and you understand this to be what? A wholesome mental state or an unwholesome mental state? Unwholesome. Okay. And Satna, then, let's say, tranquility of mind, calmness, peacefulness of mind arises, and you understand this to be wholesome or unwholesome? Wholesome. Okay. So, in the presence, or when different mental factors arise, some wholesome, some unwholesome, gradually the mind learns to make this distinction between wholesomeness and unwholesomeness. It learns that, and this is really not on an experiential point of, or the experiential basis, gradually one further learns that when unwholesome mental states are prevalent in the mind, we feel happy or unhappy? Unhappy. And when wholesome mental states suddenly arise and are present, then this is conducive to our unhappiness? Not really, to our happiness. And it is in this way, in a very basic way, that suddenly some initial understanding arises, some initial discernment of wholesomeness and unwholesomeness arises. And this then paves the road for this investigation of states, and making this differentiation between unwholesome and wholesome states. And that then helps to dispel the skeptical doubt. Now, there are other ways of overcoming skeptical doubt, and since we're already beyond the hour, let me just highlight, just give you the headings. So, knowledge of the scriptures asking questions about them. So inquiring, approaching one's teacher, seeking clarification. Then familiarity with the precepts. Then firm conviction in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. But this certainly could be more of a resultant rather than a way of approaching or overcoming skeptical doubt. Noble friendship and listening to a discourse. Now, from a practical point of view, one could add simply taking the arising of, or the arising of the presence of the hindrance of skeptical doubt as a challenge, as an opportunity to learn something about this particular mental state, and then to transform it into something else. So it's kind of like Aikido. In Aikido, people do what? They transform an aggressive energy into something positive. And that's certainly in terms of movement. Now, as mentioned earlier on, if we see the presence of the hindrance of skeptical doubt as an opportunity, then we can learn a lot about this skeptical doubt, and certainly this will also help us to strengthen our mind. Maybe one more practical aspect would be not to buy into, not to believe those doubting thoughts as certainly they are occurring. Now, when we manage to overcome the hindrance of skeptical doubt, then we are likely to experience a mind in which the skeptical doubt has been abandoned, and with this certainly then wholesome states are likely to arise, and among them faith and confidence and trust. Now, having removed doubt and overcome perplexity, a stream enterer will gain fearlessness and also becomes independent of others in regard to the teacher's dispensation, the Buddha's dispensation. What this means, your faith becomes unshakable, and certainly even if some eloquent speaker or philosopher comes around and tries to convince you of the relevance of some other philosophy or religious tradition, you just can't buy into it anymore. Now, working with the hindrance of skeptical doubt is then, and being mindful of whatever comes up, is likely to lead to the so-called purification through overcoming doubt. One of the purifications, one of the 7 purifications, Satta Visuddhi, and known in the Pali scripture language as Kanka Vitarana Visuddhi, Kanka meaning doubt. And that's your second insight knowledge. And the question that was asked earlier on, namely, whether formations are happening because of me, am I the one who's making things happening, or not? Well, the answer to this question comes up, namely, one realizes that through direct observation there are just these physical and mental formations occurring, and they occur owing to what? conditions. There you go. Now, owing to causes, relevant causes and conditions. So not owing to, not because of me interfering, controlling or manipulating, nor occurring because of some hypothetical entity such as some supreme being, but rather, or just because of certain conditions. So that is one of the results of overcoming skeptical doubt. Now, the text further state, and there's a statement to this effect in the Anguttara Nikaya 5, section 147. Once doubt has been overcome, then only will it become possible to eradicate passion, anger, and delusion. So in other words, if we have not yet totally eradicated the hindrance of skeptical doubt, we will not be able to move further ahead in our practice and eradicate the hindrances of greed, greed, anger, and delusion. In line with what had been mentioned earlier on from the Beabhayarava Sutta, a person whose mind has been freed from skeptical doubt will no longer be afraid to practice in a secluded, remote place, even if this is a dense forest, thicket. So one becomes somewhat fearless. Now, as mentioned earlier on, the overcome, or by attaining this noble path of stream entry, skeptical doubt will be cut off once and forever. And as such, one becomes known as someone who has overcome doubt, dina vichikicca in the Pali scriptural language. Now, with this, one then gains an unshakable faith. And this faith then cannot be questioned anymore. Now, the last point for today is an interesting one, namely that we do not try to overcome doubt simply by having faith or forcing ourselves to have faith, confidence, trust in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, but rather through carefully investigating what is certainly happening with the different objects, thus gaining some understanding, and with understanding and clear-cut experiences, then some initial faith arises. Every time we make we investigate and make a new discovery, our faith and confidence will increase a bit more, and ultimately, in this certain way, it will lead us to unshakable faith. Allow me to conclude today's Dhamma talk on the hindrances, and especially on the hindrance of skeptical doubt, by wishing, may we apply the fourth establishment of mindfulness as certainly given in dealing with skeptical doubt. May we also make good use of the enlightenment factor of investigation of states and other means certainly mentioned to first learn and understand the nature of skeptical doubt, and then to develop the strength to overcome this state, and ultimately may we gain the path of stream entry, and may this consequently bring about the total cutting off of skeptical doubt. May this happen during this very retreat here in the Taos Ski Valley. And this is it for tonight.